13 Questions by Man Transcending. Manhood in the Digital Age.
Perfect timing.
It was meant to be.
Perfect timing. I almost had a heart attack. And I'm praying your computer is amazing. I got a sticky button on my recorder. I hit record, and I looked over to see the time we were at question number, I think between 3 and 4, and I saw 0, and I was like, so I'm sure it's fine, and we're recording, and you nailed it in time, so we're good. We're good. But I had a mini heart attack. I'm like, did we start recording?
Yeah, we're good.
We're good.
We got the Zoom.
Oh my God, I almost had a heart attack. You have no idea.
I can imagine.
Oh, dude.
So that was amazing.
Childhood hero.
Yeah,
I didn't want to say that to Dean, but yeah. Huge fan of the man in his body of work. And strangely enough, since I was a kid, like, I know him, not knowing him as a young kid, but just seeing, you know, the video footage from SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, and all these different things. Like, it's just baked into like my visual knowledge of being a child and being really interested in the paranormal and the unknown and ufology. And, you know, he's kind of been one of those figures. And, you know, as I've gone to read more books and get into doing remote viewing, and this was a wonderful surprise, especially since I didn't even expect it. You're just like, hey, we're having Dean on. And I'm like, wait, which Dean Radin? Is it the Dean Radin? Because if it is, wow. And wow. So I guess we're doing the intro.
Yeah.
It was I'm at a loss for words. Listen, you'll like it.
So yeah, Adam is having a fanboy moment with this episode. I forget where I came across Dean Radin. I want to say it was on the Grammarica podcast, but it's been...
No, I don't think it was. I'm not sure he's ever been on Grammarica, but he has been around in a lot of places. He actually just had a really good interview on George Knapp, the investigative journalist, who broke the Area 51 story with Bob Lazar before anybody knew what S4 and all of that was. He broke that story. He's gone on to break several other large stories. He's involved in the Tic Tac videos and ATIP and all the things going on with Jeremy Corbell. But anyways, he was just on that podcast. It's a great one to check out called Mystery Wire. And he's written some books. I know you've read a couple of his books, Bill.
Yeah, I bought one of his books, Real Magic, after I heard him on a podcast, and I read it. And in that book, he's got a method on how to do a sigil, and the sigil is to find some money on the ground. So it's nothing like super like ooh woo woo magical, right? But except it worked, right? So I found $10 on the ground, found a $10 bill. I was walking out of a
really?
Mexican buffet. Wow. Yeah, I was walking out of a Mexican buffet, going back to my car. Found it on the sidewalk in between the restaurant and in the parking lot. So yeah, it worked. I haven't messed with the sigil since because it kind of creeped me out, to be honest. Yeah, so I thought that because of that experience, I should try to get him on the show, and it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, so Dean was, some of his answers were so unique and introspective. I just didn't expect them, and I was really, really, really surprised. Yeah, I don't even know what to say. Bill, good interview. I really liked it. Just, damn, I don't know.
I think you did a great job. I'm happy that you actually took the reins for this one because I've got a little dental issue. So doing anything with mouth pain is not fun. So I guess, you know, if you wanted to, we could play a little jingle and get into that segment.
Wait, this jingle, Bill?
Yeah, that's the one.
Gratitude, 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 oh, gratitude. Gratitude.
So, Bill, what is your gratitude? What are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for just being able to have the opportunity to be a part of the show and to talk to people like Dean Radin. Like, this interview was awesome. And I took a lot of notes for, it's kind of a short interview, but I wrote a lot. So if that tells you anything about the quality of what he had to say, then I think you'll enjoy it. But yeah, being a part of the team with you, you were able to kind of do most of the talking today. I'm kind of having trouble focusing. It hurts a little bit right now, but I'm just grateful that you're here to pull some of the weight when I'm not feeling too well.
Well, that's beautiful, Bill, because mine is kind of parrying off of yours. And it's grateful. We talked about it in the episode that a child smile of mastery, when they master something, they get this smile. That is something. And being able to have the experience of, and it's not the same of mastery, but going, here's somebody who I'm really aware of through my interest in a topic and a real interest in them, their work, and how they think. And then there's the opportunity for me to engage on that level. And to have that show up, lay down unexpected, and to be manifest is just the experience of having that. The complete unexpected of something truly important that you're knowledgeable about and you weren't pursuing, but yet somehow it's there, and just when that moment happens, and then everything that comes from it. Because, those moments lead to other things. It's more than just that moment, that the weight of that moment is because of that weight. So I don't know. It's that moment in the encompassing experience and the splash damage that goes out from that, at least in the game term of damage.
It's the experience of that. Dean was kind of talking about how it's hard to communicate an experience empirically to another person, but
thank you for being a part of that, Bill.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful ride so far, and I hope to continue to do this. So in order to help the show go on, if you guys, the listener, has a role model in their life that would they think would like to sit down and make a recording with you, the listener, you could ask them the 13 questions and send it into us and we could make it into an episode. We do that. It's value for value podcast. So if you would like to contribute some value via submitting your own recording, that's one way to do that. Or you can sign up to do a monthly donation or a one-time donation, both of which are options on the website, 13questionspodcast.com. That's numerals 1 and 3, questionspodcast.com. Or you can just simply share the show. At this point, we're still growing, and the more listeners that we get, the better. So if you know of anybody that would be interested in a podcast such as this, please do not hesitate to share.
If you enjoy the episode, chances are somebody else is going to enjoy the episodes. That's how half of my podcast landed in the feed. It's either through my self-discovery or my friends hitting me up and going, have you heard this? No, I haven't. Or another podcast. Have you heard this? No, I haven't. Another thing, support your other podcasts. Tell your friends about us, because if you want us to keep going and you want more people to hear us and you want us to be able to reach out, get better, different, more diverse, more fingers to reach more minds and bring in a more, different cast of people for the show.
And before we get into the interview, we should mention Shungite on this intro. We haven't.
Oh yeah, this is a value for value podcast. So we're here because of you, and we have expenses, so we have to ask. One of our past guests was so kind enough to give us an affiliate link on his store. You can go check out the show notes or the website, and we get a portion of any of the shungite that you purchase there. So if it's something that would interest you and you're in the market, you can also help support the show. And there's so many things you can do. You can support the artists that create music for the show. You can support us directly to help with, the hosting, the feeds, just everything that goes along with it. Being able to upgrade equipment. I'm happy to, we've got Bill a new mixer, and it's going to be getting hooked up and tuned in. We got to get a couple of extra wires in. But yeah, slowly and surely we get better, and that is because of you and your support, and you can turbo boost it up. You might even be able to maybe one day fund launching that tooth of yours into Alpha Centauri, which would be phenomenal to become part of a extraterrestrials like archaeological operation in space as they uncover a time capsule from Earth.
Uncovered on planet Dean, and that's Dean's civilization spawned out of his last wishes. But seriously, on a note on shungites, Derek Condit's store, Mystical Wares. Listener, if you're listening to this podcast and you already know about Dean Radin's work and you know about the book that he wrote, Real Magic, obviously talks about magic, Derek's store sells a lot more than just shungite. Mystical Wares is the store name. They just revamped it, actually. And so there's lots of metaphysical trinkets or wares, I guess you could buy. So it's more than just shungite. So if you're into things like magic and manifesting and such,
and if you're not, maybe pick up Dean's book or another book about mantras or things like that, because whether you like it or not, some things just work. Some things line up when they shouldn't. We kind of got into it, on the show. You can ask the universe a question and it will give you an answer. But what answer is it? And, that can be extrapolated, interpreted in so many different ways. But yeah, as soon as you start realizing you're in a magical world, then, there are a lot of things that are not reproducible and not quantifiable, but on an experiential level, they are. Because there is no ledger, there is no proof, there is no reconciling it as an actual fact. If you benefited, then it worked. So yeah, expand your mind. That little piece of metal that is tuning in the antenna or broadcasting your transmission, something in from space or over a radio, is ultimately just a piece of metal that was pulled up out of the ground and molded into a shape. So who knows if that crystal you're wearing around your neck, which is just a crystalline structure cut into a certain shape, really may be doing something on a level that we can't prove, but experientially you can feel. So I don't know. It's kind of a fun, very scientific way to look at the world of if the experience is there, it feels good and it works, well, maybe there's something to that.
And even if you're skeptical about things in this realm, you can do an experiment with it, which is what I started doing when I first started diving into things like tarot and whatnot. So think of it as an experiment, if anything else. But with that, I don't have anything else for the listener at the moment. Do you?
No. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. Truly, if you weren't listening, I wouldn't have this experience to be here, to have experienced what I'm so grateful for. So it spills onto you. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you for supporting the show, because, that you, the listener, we couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, so enjoy the chat with Dean Radin and support the show, guys.
Dean, welcome to 13 Questions. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Question number 1. What is the best advice ever given to you? And would you modify it at all today?
Well, it's probably the way my parents used to put it was, as long as you're happy, and that would pertain to anything, right? Like, I want to do such and such, as long as you're happy. But then later that was put in a slightly better way, I think, by Joseph Campbell, who used the phrase to follow your bliss. So I thought about that a lot, and I realized that it made a lot of sense to me. You need to figure out what you're passionate about so that when you do it, it doesn't feel like work. So you need to be in a place in your life where you can do that responsibly and not hurt anybody else in the process. But I figured out what I really want to do, and I've somehow managed to craft a life around that, so I never work.
Sounds like a dream.
Well, it's a matter of that phrase also came to mind about crafting your life. You figure out what it is that you want to do, and then you figure out a way that you can do it and be paid for doing it. So it's not always easy because it depends a lot on what it is. But you look around with what the kinds of jobs that people have. I'm thinking more about people who are in athletics, who manage to continue doing that forever. They become teachers at it, or they sell equipment or something, but that's what they want to do. They figure out a way of doing it. That's perfect. And so I would not modify it. That's my advice when I get asked by students, what should I do? And the answer always is find out what you're passionate about and figure out a way of making a living doing that.
What do you choose to ignore?
I choose to ignore as much as I can what other people think. So we are social creatures. We're very sensitive to what others want us to do or the way that we should behave. And I find that quite limiting. I certainly could not do the kind of work that I do if I cared a lot about what other people think. But that also goes into things like the other day where it was quite hot where I am, and the sun feels like it's burning. And there's a lot of smoke from forest fires. So I'm wearing a mask. I have a hat that covers the back of my neck so I don't feel that it gets burning. And I have an umbrella. So it's just better to walk in the shade. And this is a special umbrella that's made by a company called Coolie Bar, which is like SPF 50 or beyond. It's like a metallic thing or something. So it looks pretty funny. And I can tell when cars go by that people are kind of smiling as they go past. And my wife is thinking, well, that's not thinking. She said, she's kind of laughing at me. And I thought, well, this is actually perfect. Like, I don't really care what those people think in the car. I'm cool and I'm not breathing smoke. So they can be the way, however they want to be, but at least I'm comfortable. Whereas if I were very sensitive and I really cared what other people think, I wouldn't do that, right? I'd put up with breathing the smoke and being hot, and that's just not who I am.
Yeah, it's just one less thing to get worried about, or to have to be worried about or concerned about, is other people's opinions, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's amusing. They're living this weird reality where you're affecting them for you just being you.
Well, I don't see it as a weird reality. I see it as this is the way that makes me comfortable. Mm-hmm. And as long as it's not hurting somebody else in the process, then why not?
Oh yeah, I just love that other people occupy their mind, to give the stare, to even I don't know, take it into their mind, to occupy it, to be bemused instead of just doing what
again. We are social creatures. We are primates, and very, very sensitive to what's going on with the other primates. So I'm aware of what other people are thinking or how they're behaving, but I just choose not to pay that much attention to it.
What book has been most influential on your life and why?
So that one's easy. It's Be Here Now by Ram Dass. So that came out something like 1970 or 71. I had read a lot of science fiction and books on the mystic masters of the West and the East and that sort of thing. But this book was a little bit different because it was kind of a combination of a graphic novel, because it had nice illustrations in it. It told the story of Richard Alpert and how he turned into Ram Dass. And there's some remarkable things that he talks about in there, which I felt rang true. So it's one of the first times I think I read a book where I felt I have to read this again and then read it again very, very carefully. So I did. So I still have that book on my shelf along with about 1,000 other books. And I consider that to be important in that it was revealing something from a Western perspective that normally at that time you would have only really gotten if you were an Easterner. But so here was a Westerner talking about things that were part of the Eastern spiritual traditions, and it just felt right to me, felt real. So that was quite influential.
Awesome. Yeah, it's always good when you get access to knowledge like that at an earlier age when it can really impact you. There's a lot of books I look back on and wish that I'd gotten a hold of when I was much younger.
Yeah, I think I must have been around 20 or so when that book came out. Something like that.
What rule do you have for yourself that you never break, and why do you think that it's important?
First rule is never say never. So there are no rules that can never be broken because things can happen. Beyond that, so I would say rather than rules that can't be broken, I would say, what are your aspirations? What do you aspire to do or not do? So I aspire to be kind, and because kindness is its own reward, right? Whether it's given back to you or not doesn't really matter. It's its own virtue, and that's pretty much it. So be kind. It can be true in endless situations. Be kind with other people, with what you do, all those things. So that's the aspiration. Whether it's broken or not, well, people are variable and conditions and cultures are variable. So you can't always do it, but nevertheless, that's the aspiration.
I like that being kind is its own reward, and that can be kind of, I don't know, it sounds kind of selfish to me, and it's a weird analogy that I always have whenever that comes up. But I first of all, I agree with the statement, but for like an analogy that I think of back in, I don't know, the medieval times when the church sold indulgences, right? It was the money that the person would spend to buy this indulgence would like go to charity. So it was seen as, oh, this person is charitable. Well, in reality, what the church was saying was like, well, if you give us money to go to, the church, quote unquote, the church or whatever, like your sins will be absolved, right? So it was really benefiting them. Well, you could kind of apply kindness in the same way, but without all the weird money magic stuff, right?
Well, yeah, because you're doing it without the expectation of a return, which is an important element to it. You're not being kind because you need a response, but that's because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, so it's more than just being kind outwardly to virtue signal to other people. It benefits all parties involved.
Yeah. So as an example, we have wasps that have seemed to be interested in our house and are building nests in places where it's not convenient. So the kind thing to do is somehow figure out a way to urge them to go away, go somewhere else. It could end up bothering somebody else, which is not great, but that then doesn't become my problem. On the other hand, the wasp decided that a really good place to build a nest is inside the internet utility box outside our house. That's not good because I rely on my bandwidth all the time, and the likelihood is that they will eventually start eating stuff in there, and it's going to break the system. So I had an exterminator come, And I don't feel very kind about it because he got rid of their nest and put something in there to discourage him from being there. So this is what I mean by aspirations. I aspire to be kind whenever I can without hurting other people or creatures, but sometimes it doesn't work out so well. By comparison, when I was in India for a while, I met people who follow the Jain religion. And there the priests will wear a mask. And this was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, so it had nothing to do with pandemics. They wear a mask so they don't accidentally breathe in an insect, because the religion is so dead set against harming any other creature, even an insect, that they go to special pains not to. So it's like it's vegan plus. You harm nothing, and they take it very seriously. And so I resonate with that, except that I don't want the wasps to eat my bandwidth, or worse, to like make something blow up on the side of my house. So sometimes our aspirations have to be set aside for a moment.
If I were to ask your best friend, what is the one thing they would say you need to work on the most, and why?
They would say I work too much, and so I should play more. So I'm physiologically, I'm wired tight. It's high generalized anxiety. And I see this actually among some of my colleagues, and there's certainly a lot of academics that I've met, that we're manic, right? Once we bite into a topic, it becomes a motivator. It's very motivating to just dive into it and stay in it. So that's not probably the most healthy thing to do, to keep working on it. But so I have always found it difficult to relax. So relaxing for me is getting a pile of new data and doing a statistical analysis on it. So somebody who doesn't do that sort of thing, that would sound like crazy. But actually, it is kind of relaxing. It's having the fun of diving into data that the universe was kind enough to give to you, and is trying to give you a hint about the way the universe works. And I'm going to now relax in a pool while I could have the opportunity of uncovering the secrets of the universe. No, I'm not going to go into the pool. I'm going to work on that spreadsheet. That is not to say that if there was a pool in the right place, I probably would go in it, but not very long.
No, I like it. It's a flip side of what really is relaxing. Relaxing is a way to spend your time to either decompress or enjoy. So if you get that out of what other people don't consider it to be, I don't know, it sounds like you're doing the right thing.
Well, yeah. So actually one of the downsides perhaps of being paid to do what you want to do is that why would you not want to do that anymore? Right. So the main thing is that if you find that you're getting really hyper about something, well, then you need to calm down. And so the question is, well, how do you calm down? What are you going to do to relax? Well, for me, it's picking up one of an endless number of books that I keep intending on reading and reading that book. So I then look at, well, what is the ratio between fiction and nonfiction? It's almost all nonfiction, because I want to learn more about this particular interpretation of quantum mechanics, or I want to learn something. And occasionally I will pick up a science fiction book or something like that. But the problem is when I was a kid, I read so much science fiction that I think I've read them out. In fact, I find it difficult to watch movies now. There are science fiction movies, because it's so formulaic, or it's based on things that I've read before that I can predict the whole thing. There are exceptions, and the exceptions are very delightful. So the movie Arrival is a recent example of a very, very well done movie. So I enjoyed that a lot. So I guess I relax when I watch that.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing about stories like that, where it's able to take your mind and look at something at a different angle that you couldn't or weren't capable or didn't know was there before, which then, allows me to see other things. So yeah, if you've read out the subject, you need some new blood in the water to really suss something new out.
Yeah. Well, it's like in most fiction there's like 36 stories,
Mm-hmm.
and there's then endless variations on those stories. And it's not bad. I mean, because especially in a movie, the way that a story is presented can be highly creative. And so that makes it pleasant to watch too. So one of my hobbies at this right now, which is, I suppose, a way to relax, because it's quite different than what I usually do, is writing a science fiction TV series. So what I did is I took some of the research that we're doing and simply did like you usually do in science fiction, and you project. Well, if this turns out to be the way we think it is, well, that would be an interesting story. So with a writing partner who's a professional at doing that sort of thing, we wrote a science fiction pilot of a series and the series Bible and all that stuff. And it's being shopped around now. So with any luck, we'll actually get our series on the air.
Phenomenal. I look forward to seeing that. Really look forward to seeing what comes out of your mind in the science fiction realm.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Well, that one is all about asking the universe a question and getting an answer. That's what an empiricist does. So we do an experiment, we have an experience, we're asking a question about the nature of reality and getting an answer. And so the real fun happens. What turns me on about it is that occasionally we get a surprising answer. So getting an answer is fun. Getting a surprising answer means, now this is a clue you really need to pay attention to. And that does happen. And it happens often enough that it fuels the reason why we want to do experiments in the first place, right? Like we think we might actually know the answer to this, but we're going to try it anyway. And then we do the experiment and we get a completely unexpected response. And that's always very exciting. And it comes up in my line of work pretty often because since we're testing things like psychic phenomena, one of the issues involved with this is we don't know where the source of psi is. That's one of the ways of putting this. So psi is psychic. When you do an experiment, the experimenter is wrapped into the experiment. You can't extract the investigator. And so you might be working with people who are doing some kind of a task, but since you can't remove the experimenter, if you happen to be a psychic experimenter, you can arrange everything, not consciously necessarily, but unconsciously arrange it in such a way that the entire thing will work. And this is why colleagues will then say, well, you got a good result because it's an experimenter effect. Meaning you as the experimenter used your own psychic ability to figure out all of the various steps along the way so that you would end up with the result that you want. And yes, I do see that. See it in my own results. I see it in the results of my colleagues as well. That's why it's very important that when a surprising result comes along that was not part of your expectations, and maybe you didn't even want to see that result, that's why it's important. Because then the universe is telling you, no, this is not just about you. This is actually about the universe.
Yeah, kind of like you ask one question, but it gives you a different answer. An important answer, but not the one you wanted.
Yes. And also, a surprising answer almost always leads to many, many more questions. Not only, well, why did that happen, but what does that mean? Like, is it the way that I asked the question or some other factor that we're completely unaware of? Those are things that force creativity, and it's fun. And yeah, even, I don't know about spiritually, but emotionally, it's exciting.
Would you say that the universe always gives you an answer for no matter what question you're asking?
Yes. The universe will always give you an answer, which is exactly the question that you're asking. And it's really tough to ask the right questions. So sometimes you'll ask a question by the design of your experiment, and you're unaware of what you're actually asking. But the universe will always respond. We just have to be clever enough to figure out did I ask really the question I thought I had in mind? And am I smart enough to figure out the actual answer?
And then you did mention about where the source of psi is. And
Yeah.
I was curious as to, because when we do get answers that are surprising to us, and we do get kind of curious as to, okay, where did that come from? But the way that I like to look at that is not worrying so much as where the source is, but how we can better improve our capabilities to perceive that information, because we know the information's out there. So I think the more pertinent thing to pay attention to is how can we increase our ability to gather in that information ourselves on a personal, individual level. Do you have any insight to that?
Yeah, well, that's well said. The difference between an experience and an experiment is about the degree of formality involved and also the degree of planning. So an experiment is an experience. It's we don't think of it usually in those terms, but you think up something in your head and then you try something and then you get a response. Well, that's an experience. The formality of it is useful because typically you do an experiment where it's under some kind of controlled conditions so that you're able to tell, was this just a fluke? Was this chance? What was it? And so by being able to exclude a whole due diligence list of possible other explanations, you're just a little bit closer to understanding the nature of that experience. So sometimes people say that the results of these experiments, maybe they show telepathy, but you need statistics in order to figure out did it really happen. It's not gigantic stuff. It's not the UFO landing in your face. So how do we, the way that I respond to that then is, well, yeah, in the everyday uncontrolled world, you could have a life-changing telepathic experience that's spontaneous, but nobody else is going to believe it. They might believe it, but it's your experience. You can't share it very easily. Whereas if we do an experiment with unselected undergraduates from some university somewhere, and we're able to run them through a controlled telepathy experiment, and we get a 30% hit rate where 25% is by chance, if you know about the statistics involved, your head will explode. But if you don't know about the statistics, you'd say, well, what's the big deal? They only get a 30% chance, but 25% was, why would I be excited about that? So the answer is, well, in a spontaneous event, we never really know what caused it. It could have been chance. But when we do an experiment like this and we can figure out the probability of the result, we know that it wasn't sensory leakage. We know it wasn't a confederate. We know it wasn't chance. We know it wasn't all of these other things. And the only thing left over then is somehow information in one person's head got into the other person's head. In other words, it's telepathy. And we know it with very high confidence, depending on the result of the experiment. So I've done those kinds of experiments many times, and my colleagues have done even more. And so we can say with very high confidence that, yeah, telepathy exists and precognition exists. All of these various elementary psychic phenomena, they're real. But it takes a bit of appreciation for statistics to fully get it. So that's one of the reasons why I write articles and books, is to try to cast the technical aspects of doing this and explain why you have to do it in that way, and also why we really do have very high confidence that these things are real, and sometimes also why we should care that they're real.
Yeah, I did read your book, Real Magic, and you did an amazing job writing that. I took like one summer course in statistics in college, and I was able to understand everything in the book. So, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Then I have done my job. Yeah. Thank you.
What was the most embarrassing or humbling experience of your life?
From around age 5 to 25, I was a violinist. I imagined, and my parents and everyone else imagined, that was going to be my career, concert violinist. So I started playing in orchestras probably maybe at age 7 or 8. And usually either the concertmaster, which is the first violinist, or the principal second, which is the person leading the second strings. So in a position of authority, as much as there is authority for an 8-year-old. And so one time we were giving a concert and I had to pee. And so this creates a problem because you're in the middle of a concert and what do? Well, you don't want to just pee because that would not be good. So I made the difficult decision of getting up and leaving to go pee in the middle of we're playing something. So fortunately, as I said before, that I don't care all that much about what other people think. I knew this would create a ruckus, and they were certainly not going to stop the show as a result of one of the violinists getting up and just walking out. So I got up, I went away, I peed, I came back, and I continued. And then afterwards, I had a peculiar looks from my parents who happened to be in the audience at the time, and I just said, I had to pee. What are you going to do? Your body has needs, and so you got to do something. So this kind of behavior has been around for a very long time, and that's an example, as I think around eight or nine or something like that. That what you have to do certain things at certain times, and it doesn't really matter what the context is. So that was kind of embarrassing. I wouldn't say it was exactly humbling, but it was embarrassing. Yeah.
What is your greatest fear? How did you overcome it if you have?
Well, I'm highly introverted. And so when COVID came along and suddenly we couldn't go anywhere anymore, this was like my dream come true because I've always been on the edge of agoraphobic. Like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to hang around at other people. I don't like to go to concerts. I don't like to be where there's lots of other people. And so I've thought about this a lot because I certainly have friends who are extroverted and even other introverted friends who enjoy that sort of thing. I don't at all. That's what, like, for me, Zoom is an answer to prayers. So I can engage with people, but not have to actually be there. And after thinking about this for a long time, I realized that some kids, including me, are extremely sensitive. Like you can meet these kids. There's some kids who are just crazy sensitive. They're sensitive about everything, including something about the emotional field of other people. So you take that, and I definitely have that. But you also combine that then with 20 years of playing in orchestras. And I cannot, even to this day, go see a live performance because I immediately know what it is like to do that performance as a performer. And it wasn't really that pleasant. It felt like work, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't go into music as a profession, because I was pretty good at playing, but it was work. It was like, it's both physical work. You have to be an athlete to be a really good musician. So it was physical work. And a lot of times, especially in orchestras, the violins have a kind of a boring piece. You're doing pizzicato for half an hour and you're just bored out of your mind. And I know I wasn't alone in this because oftentimes, generally not during a performance, but during practice, everybody in the orchestra was fooling around, even at the professional level. So we would play games like we would have our instrument cases near or under our chairs. And in the moment of distraction, the person behind you would grab your instrument case with their feet and pull it back. And then eventually, because your attention's constantly being modulated during these things, all of the instrument cases would end up in the back of the room. All of them. And of course, then you'd look down because you need to get a mute or you need to get something in your case and it's not there. And it would create chaos. And of course, the conductor could see what was happening, but they didn't want to stop because the rehearsal was going well. So that was just one example of what happens in these long practice sessions because you get bored out of your skull. So I figured that if there was any way of making a living that didn't mean I had to do this the rest of my life, then I'm going to do that instead. That's why I switched into electrical engineering because I figured, well, I could probably get a pretty good job with that, and maybe it wouldn't be quite as boring. So what this tells me otherwise is my passion being a concert violinist? And the answer was no. So I didn't do that. People often ask today, do you still play? And the answer is no, because I know how much work it takes in order to get to the level where you're like a professional. I don't want to do that kind of work. So in graduate school, after I've already figured out I didn't want to do this for a living, I switched into bluegrass banjo, and I was able to pick it up very quickly. And that was fun. And that still is fun. It's much easier to play physically, and it's much happier, even though the lyrics of most bluegrass tones make you want to kill yourself. But yeah, so I still enjoy bluegrass a lot.
What is your single greatest driving force in life, and how do you further it?
That would be to know, which is not that uncommon among scientists. I have an overriding need to know everything. I know that's not possible, but it doesn't stop the drive. I enjoy knowing stuff. I once saw a lecture by a specialist in child development, and he used this phrase, the smile of mastery, that if you're dealing with a baby and the baby figures out how to do something very simple, like they figured out how to pick up something with their hand, they get a big smile. It's the smile of mastery. It's suddenly recognizing that, oh, I can do something. Well, the same is true for the smile of mastery when you know something. So one of the reasons why I was attracted to engineering is because, having read all the science fiction, I wanted to know how to make a rocket. How do you make a rocket go? Well, you take control theory eventually, and you learn the right kind of mathematics, and you can design a rocket engine that will actually work. Well, that gave me a smile of mastery. I also got an A on that test, but so that you can see the joy of it. That in engineering, you're learning how do you wield the tools that we've developed to manipulate the physical world in all kinds of different ways. So that was always fun. That's why I liked engineering.
Yeah, and it kind of gets you to be on that edge where you can make new discoveries of information that really kind of drive being able to do more and make more and build on that, the shoulder of the giants.
Well, I saw it as it's useful tools to learn if you're going to do experiments that involve equipment. Because the equipment's not scary. You can figure out all kinds of new equipment very quickly. It also teaches you, if you're doing it well, to be very, very diligent and careful. So one of the classes I taught in graduate school was electronics lab. So you're taking undergraduates and learning how to use things like oscilloscopes and make circuits and so on. And I discovered very quickly that there's two things that you could say that would solve 95% of the problems that students have when they come to you. So they'll come and say, this is not working. I don't know how to make this circuit work or how to make this instrument work. First rule, is it plugged in? That solves like 80% right there. And the second rule, is it turned on? Well, there's 95% of your problems. So all it takes is like a moment of mindfulness in a laboratory. And you find again and again, when you're working with much more sophisticated equipment, you simply have to be diligent about following every single step along the way. Otherwise, you either won't work at all, or the data that you're getting is going to be wrong somehow. So that has to be something that fits naturally with the person. Because if you're not somebody who wants to follow extreme care and sequences of events, you're not going to enjoy being in the laboratory. But fortunately, I do. I somehow like that.
Who were and or are your role models, and why?
Many, many people. I suppose the first is my father. He was a sculptor and fine artist for his living, but he also had a law degree, and he had 4 university degrees in English and philosophy. So what I learned from that is that he made his living doing what he liked to do, which was sculpture and fine art. But he also had this overriding need to know as well. And you could do both. So as a role model, then what I saw was living in an artistic family where everyone was always doing something artistic. I was in music, but my brother ended up in theater, even though he's a dentist. I was a violinist, but then I became an engineer and then a psychologist. So the early lessons were you don't have to limit yourself, and you don't have to define yourself by you are an artist and that's all you can be, or you're a lawyer and at the same time you can't be a philosopher or something like that. So that was important. Then afterwards, I would say almost everyone that I've met among my colleagues and a number of my university professors also, they were all role models. I learned something from all of them. And so one that I'll mention who doesn't like me to say that he was influential, I don't know why, was my boss when I was working at SRI International. So this was the StarGate program. We were doing psychic espionage research. And before that, I was working at Bell Labs. So I already knew what it was like to work in big science, hundreds or thousands in that case of scientists and engineers working at the edge of, in that case, telecommunications, but also lots of other things, physics and whatever. So SRI International is very similar to that. It's a bunch of scientists doing contract work for the government and other people. And so I switch from Bell Labs and go to SRI, except now the topic is not telecommunications or physics, it's about psychic phenomena, which is a gigantic eye-opener for me because I kind of felt that there was probably something going on, but that really cemented it to me because you have the opportunity to work with people who are very talented in an environment where the science was stellar. And so I watched very carefully my boss and his boss about how were they navigating doing this. We're doing science at top tier, world-class facilities and the best that is available at the time on a topic that outside the building, most scientists didn't even believe. Well, that's a very strange condition. It's very different than working in something like academic physics where everybody sort of knows what you're doing. Well, they didn't know what we were doing, and yet we're still getting amazing results. So I learned a lot from watching how they did it. How could they work and reconcile that they're doing something which other people don't even believe is possible, and yet we're doing it as part of our daily business. So that was very instructive for me. So that's I mean, I could list names of people which wouldn't mean anything, but it's many of my colleagues I've learned from everyone, basically.
Well, and imagine being in that environment too. You have to do everything to a higher standard, cross more T's, double, triple check, just because there's that much more pressure. So, yeah, I can imagine being around people that are, drawn towards that environment. It's probably a very healthy place for people to play off each other and learn.
Well, I would say that that's true in any kind of laboratory context. I mean, that's part of the way science works. You're constantly criticizing yourself and having your colleagues and peers criticize you too. And of course, there are two ways of doing criticism. You could do it constructively, which is extremely valuable, or you can do it destructively, which is what skeptics do. They have a capital S. So they tend to deconstruct. They don't want what you're doing to be real, and they could be quite nasty about it. But constructive criticism is extremely valuable because nobody wants to waste their time doing a mistake. So we saw a lot of that at SRI and many other places I've worked where people are screaming at each other, but in a way that you know that they're doing it for constructive purposes. It sounds funny to say that the people will scream at each other like this, but you know that they're trying to be helpful. And a lot of times you can get set in your ways or you believe that you're doing something right, and somebody needs to scream at you in order to make sure that you're paying attention. But it's even more than that. That environment in particular was a classified environment. So you're not only doing normal science, you're doing it under a condition where there are many, many people watching what you're doing and making sure that nothing leaks out. Both the professional security people and your own colleagues, and you oftentimes won't know what the person next door is doing because you don't have the need to know. So that makes it another notch up in terms of the degree of discipline that's needed in order to work in that environment. And actually, I found it not very pleasant to have that additional step, but that's a requirement of the job.
What quality do you most admire in a woman?
Well, one would be that they look at me without a look of horror on their face. So that's one. I admire that. But mainly is, as with my wife, qualities of independence and intelligence, both. So I think basically all of the women that I've known in one way or another have been quite intelligent. It just makes it easier to communicate. Independence, though, is also very important because I can just barely take care of myself, and I don't want to have to be responsible for anybody else. My dog is a little bit different because my dog doesn't have the choice of taking care of himself, and he's going blind, and so it's even more care that I have to pay attention to. So I would say independence and intelligence. Yeah, and looking at me without an expression, the Edward Munch thing, the scream, remember that?
Yeah.
So yeah, if a woman looks at me and has that expression, then that's not good. Unfortunately, I don't think, well, maybe they do, but I'm not paying attention to them.
What is the most courageous thing you have ever done or seen in your life?
One time when I was a teenager, my family had a trip to New York City, and we were carjacked at gunpoint. So the most courageous thing I've ever seen is my dad, who was in the front as the driver. My mom's next to him. I'm with my brother in the back seat. My dad was extremely calm. You know, he has a gun pointing directly at his face. I was certainly aware of what was happening, but he said, "Okay, everyone get out of the car now." So we did. Everything was fine, except I left my violin case in the car because we had to get out quick. And this was a very, very expensive violin, at least from our perspective at that time. And so my mom did something which is a combination of the most courageous thing and the stupidest thing at the same time. She ran back to the car and she waved down the guy and said, Mr. Robber, can I take my son's violin case?" Which was in the back seat. And the robber, the carjacker, was so startled by this that he said, "Oh, okay." So she got it and she retrieved the violin. So afterwards, we were thinking, what in the world are you doing? Well, in that case, this was like mother's protection overriding. You know, the mother bear will kill you. Well, she felt that my violin case was so important that she essentially risked her life in retrospect to wave down the robber and ask Mr. Robber, "Can we have the violin case?" So I've never forgotten that. I'm not sure I would have been able to do that. So at first it was my father who was exuding calm, like everything is fine, just do what the man says. And the second was my mom being like a mother bear.
That's an amazing story. I'm just thinking of, you know, all like you telling the story, all the perspectives. You know, the robber is going to be telling this story to people in remissing. Your dad's got the gun in his face. You've got the kind of that's I don't know. That is an amazingly interesting event to be part of.
Yeah. So they took the car. We learned later that they were going from gas station to gas station and stealing cars at the gas station. So they'd take a car, they'd go to the next gas station, they'd steal money, they'd take the next car, and so on. They'd been doing this apparently for a while. So our car was found only a couple blocks away by the police when they went to another gas station. But in the meantime, we went to one of the precincts at the police stations, and we're looking at mug books. And of course, the mug books are gigantic, and everyone looks identical. in it. So I don't remember that part too much other than looking at these massive books of mugshots. What I do remember is that the detectives who were in the room at the time, they all looked like dandies. They had fancy silk vests and they had the holsters. One had a cowboy hat on. This was New York City. I was thinking, wow, this is like a movie set. But it was, I don't know, Precinct 44 or something like that. So I always remember that as well. These cops are really sharp. At least the detectives were.
What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
It means that the spectrum of what it can mean is gigantic, a huge spectrum of possibilities. And so kind of along the lines of follow your bliss and be here now, I would say what it means is to be yourself. To be yourself, whatever that happens to be. Maybe you're an MMA fighter. Well, that's fine. That's a good job if you like to do that sort of thing. Or you're a violinist, or you're a ballet dancer, or it could be anything with the caveat that it shouldn't be hurting anybody else. So that, and of course, that's quite different in today's world than it would have been 20 years and 100 years ago. The constraints on what you were allowed to be. So we recently watched Downton Abbey, in which one of the characters is gay, and he'd never met anybody like himself, and it was illegal to be gay at the time. Well, the world evolves, fortunately, and so things that used to be illegal or dangerous are slowly not being that anymore. So being yourself is, I think, the way to go. That doesn't mean that that you need to be yourself, right? I mean, or that's not quite right. It doesn't mean you need to be different just for the sake of being different. So I know people who will wear a dress, like a man will wear a dress for shock value. Well, in a sense, that's okay if that's what they're interested in, as long as it's not hurting anybody else. That's fine. But I wouldn't be driven in that direction because it's not something that I'm interested in. So be yourself, follow your bliss, and be here now.
Beautiful. Well, Dean, that was the end of the 13 questions. I don't know if you have a few moments for a few bonus questions.
I've got at least.
So my dog is not complaining, so we have time.
Perfect.
Okay, good. I was going to ask you at least one, so I'll do this one first. And this was actually submitted to us by a past guest of the show, Carpo. And the question is, if you could give one sentence of advice to the future generations, what would it be?
Don't screw it up. Right? I mean, one of my friends puts it in this form that the future depends on quotidian choices. So quotidian means daily. So your daily choice on how you wish to live times 8 billion or soon 9 billion, 10 billion, that it determines the livelihood or even the life of people in the future beyond yourself. So every single time you make any kind of choice, the simple way that expresses itself is that if you don't like the policies of a place that you buy things, well, don't go there anymore. But it's true in any action. Every single action that you do or decision that could possibly influence somebody else in any way, you have the choice of what you do. So if you have 8 billion people making the right choice, and it's not always clear what that is, but at least a beneficial choice, that changes the world very, very quickly. Or at least, that would change the world very quickly. We're always up against the status quo, and the status quo doesn't like to change. And one of my concerns then about the future is that we will end up killing ourselves because the status quo simply cannot change fast enough.
And that kind of speaks to what is that figure for the critical mass of population is like the square root of 1%. If everybody is on the same wavelength, it'll have an effect on the greater population. So if everybody is kind of making the right choices on a daily basis, eventually we'll kind of shift into where we need to be.
Yeah. So that figure, I think that comes out of the TM movement. It's like the Maharishi said something like that.
Yeah.
I think a probably more realistic figure is more like 10%. That if 10%, that 90% of the rest of us will follow the 10% who look like they're doing really well, and or making the right choices. And 10%, it's a lot in absolute numbers, but it's not. It just means 1 in 10 people have to do the right thing. Again, the right thing is complex because you could be doing something that is right for you and even your family and environment that actually is really bad for somebody else. So it is never clear when you're dealing with something as complex as the earth and human behavior on exactly what the right thing is. It probably couldn't help or it couldn't hurt for things like mass meditations, because in the grand scheme, if everybody decided that we're going to meditate on peace, then there wouldn't be anybody left around to do anything bad. But you need 100% of everyone. Well, what if 90% did it or 50%? I think actually it would make a big difference in the world. So the usual response when there's a school shooting is that the politicians send their thoughts and prayers. And it's almost become like a joke at this point that the only thing you're going to do is have thoughts and prayers. Well, there's reasonably good evidence that thoughts and prayers actually do something. It does change the world, but it only changes it if there's coherence involved. If you have 10 billion different thoughts and prayers, they're going to wash themselves out. If you have some large percentage of the world thinking along the same wavelength or being coherent about it, that does change the world. It's just relatively rare that happens. So thoughts and prayers, but together somehow.
Which also speaks to the power of propaganda too, the ability to influence a mass number of people to think in a certain way, right?
Yes. Yep.
And then the other bonus question that I had in mind is, what institution of society or structural aspect of modern life would you change given the chance?
Oh, that's a good one. You're talking about what is it like in Dean world?
Yeah.
Well, I would go back in time, and when Dwight Eisenhower was warning us about the military-industrial complex, I would probably have said again and again, listen to what this guy is saying because he knows what he's talking about. Because it is a gigantic problem that is extremely difficult to change at this point. So we heard figures like we spent $3 trillion in Afghanistan. Well, where did all of that go? A very large chunk of it went right back into our own economy, into the military-industrial complex. So you find people who are just really angry about the idea of the United States becoming a socialist country. Well, the United States is a socialist country for certain people. They will get trillions of dollars to make things that the military structure uses. Somehow that's never mentioned. And so do we need a military? Yes. There are bad people in the world. Do we need the security and all the apparatus? Yes, we need some of it, certainly. But wars are always started by politicians. So how do we get the people who are willing to put their lives at risk, the soldiers, which I'm very happy that they are willing to do that. I've met many people in the military, and I'm actually very impressed with the people I've met. But the politicians in Dean world would be the first in the front line. I want to see our members of Congress out there with guns who are doing something in Afghanistan or somewhere else first. And of course, this is the way it was for, at least at some point in history, of the Romans and the Greeks and Genghis Khan and all the rest. They were leaders because they showed that they're willing to go out and put their own lives at risk. Well, I'd like to see that again. That would change things very radically. It would have to take place in Dean world everywhere in the world, but you would see a very fast change in the way that the world works.
Yeah, that reminds me of a System of a Down song where one of the lyrics is "They always send the poor" when they're talking about war. So yeah, it would be really interesting to see what would happen if the rich people had to go and sacrifice their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that because our military is a meritocracy, a very, very small percentage of people are actually serving in the military. I forget how much, 1%, 2%. So it makes it much easier for all of the rest of us to sort of ignore what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we kind of hear about it a little bit, but that also makes it much, much easier for politicians to do what they want to do without anybody complaining about it. So I remember very clearly, I was in college when all of the student Vietnam protests were going on. And we had to decide on a daily basis when walking to classes, are going to have the National Guard out there today? Are they going to shoot us today? Well, it's because there was a draft. And so if we instituted a draft and everyone had to serve in some fashion, maybe they could be conscientious objectors, but be a medic or something, that would change things very quickly too. So, I mean, there's a million ways of revising how things unfold in Dean world. So I think one of the first I would do though is go back to Dwight and say, yeah, Dwight was right. Pay attention. How you stop it, I don't know, but at least emphasize that he was talking because he knew what was about to happen.
It's a good answer. It's a unique one. I don't think we've had that before, but I totally agree. Yeah. Okay, last one, if you have time. I'm curious, what do you hope people will say at your funeral?
Well, I plan on being cremated and some of the ashes shot into another galaxy, because that's about the only way I'm going to end up in another galaxy, and I really want to do that. So like going to Mars is pedestrian, like who cares about the solar system? I want to be shot perpendicular to the Milky Way and end up somewhere really different. So my ashes are going to go in something to do that. And you can do that now. There are services that will take some bit of your ashes and put it on a rocket and shoot it. So maybe by the time I die, that there'll be even more powerful rockets that can do that.
Well, it's phenomenal. If there's something to the consciousness on this end and, matter and entanglement, maybe, on the flip side, you'll have a different or added experience that other humans aren't going to have.
Well, possibly, although I think I'm more inclined to think that consciousness actually is primary over the physical world. And in which case, what happens to the body is not irrelevant, but it's not as important as what happens to your awareness, to your consciousness. So I hope that when I depart this particular incarnation, that my awareness will be able to explore the universe in some way by itself, without needing to be embodied. So as to what people will say at a funeral, they'll probably say something, oh, that's a pity. That's a pity that he died. But I mean, the older you get, the more people you know who have passed away. And so I look at people I know who were just exceptional people, both as human beings and as scientists or scholars, and their obituary is one paragraph. How do you capture an entire person's life in one paragraph? People are sad, of course, that you're gone. And so you hear things like, that's a pity. That was such a pity. That's why I don't dwell on it very much, because, other people will say, well, that was too bad. Now what's on TV? So even in cases like I know a Nobel laureate who passed away, and I know people who are reasonably famous and well accomplished and so on, they still get a paragraph. And so is that the measure of a person's life? Well, no, but that's what happens.
Yeah, death is the great equalizer. Can't really sum up. It's hard to sum up a lifetime in a paragraph, for sure.
Yeah, so we should all have the opportunity to write that paragraph, by the way.
That's a good idea.
Write your obit. You have a maximum of 100 words. or even, let's say 100 words. That's it. That's what's allowed to be posted. So I haven't written that, so I don't know what mine would say, but something like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. And then, I love the idea of being shot out into space. It's something I've never thought of before. Like that reminds me of like the Viking funeral, right? You're set on, but it's sci-fi.
Yeah, I forget how much they collect, like a half an ounce or something of ash, and put it in a little tube, and then you go with 50,000 other people in a rocket, and boom, there you go. So I think at one point, I think there might have been a service that would deposit you on the moon. And then others now I've read that you will be shot in an orbit that will take you out of the solar system and then eventually out of the galaxy. So, of course, ashes, if you're thinking of what I would do is I would shoot DNA, because then there's a possibility that you might be able to be resurrected in some form. I mean, it wouldn't be you, but your body resurrected. Or maybe you could seed life on a whole new solar system or something. That'd be fun. So I mean, maybe I should, if I can't find a business that's doing that, it's not even that difficult anymore. You could take like a piece of nail, like a thumbnail, and that would have enough DNA in it to last forever, basically, and shoot those off into space with your 50,000 friends.
Dean's World.
Yeah, Dean World.
All right, Dean. Well, that was it. That was the questions.
Okay.
So, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know. How was it for you? How was it for you going through the questions? I know they're generally deeper than most podcasts or shows have when interviewing you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's good. It's true. These are not the questions I usually get. I usually talked about my work or something like that. So they're fine. So it's good to be asked a question that I don't hear often. And now my dog is staring at me.
So perfect timing. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight,
thank you.
Dean.
You're welcome.
Awesome. And again, seriously, Dean, thank you so much for your work, coming on the show, and the time and everything that you do. It means a lot. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay. Feed the dog.
Night, Dean.
Why is one man rich and another man poor? Why we ain't satisfied? Why we gotta have more? Why your suicide rates on the rest so high? Why I tell you the truth but you say don't lie? Why is being a good father at an all-time low? Why is it acceptable? Yo, why I don't know. Why she blame him and he blame her? It's useless. Ask yourself this question. Why you making excuses? Why do parents gotta bury their kids? Why we text and drive, not caring how scary it is? Why it's so hard to forgive and leave the past behind? And if you did, then that's divine. Why don't you help your brother when you see him fall? Why do we act like God don't see it all? Why do we call them black, them white, them Asians and use labels? Now that's racism. I don't wanna Hawaii. Why? 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 I don't wanna Hawaii. Why is there innocent people locked up for life? While some people can't say nothing nice. Why do we always gotta question what all of it means? And why won't you follow your dreams? Tell me why. The night when you took my dad, why'd you let me see my grandpa cry? And tell me why. And why do you choose to hide, even though you was born to fly? And tell me why. And why don't we turn from all the hate? And why don't we learn from all mistakes? Why do I keep on wrecking these fat beats? And teachers don't make more than professional athletes. And why? And why? And why? And why? And why? And why?
I don't wanna hold it. I don't wanna hold it. Why? I don't wanna hold it. 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 I don't wanna hold it.
This should be considered entertainment and not therapy. We hope you benefit from our resources available at 13questionspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.